joining me is a very good friend, sister. I have worked with her in the past in a different time. A few years ago, we had worked in a conference for the Sisters of Hanoa a long time ago, the Grandmother Summit. She was a presenter, as was I, back in 2010. And I've met her. I've seen her work in person. I have always referenced back to her work. I have found often in my own research a valuable resource. She is an amazing person, and as far as I'm concerned, she is one of the most foremost expert in the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. Suppressed matriarchal histories, the goddess, the woman, the divine feminine, how, what, where, and why. And we're also going to be looking at the collective archetypal patterns for the United States and other key significant areas of the world, perhaps, if we have time to get into them. One of the things that I have been personally pursuing on my blog, The Yin Factor, is the concept of healing the American goddess energies within women, finding our roots, digging a little deeper into the land and the legends that we stand on every day here in the United States. I understand very clearly that the United States was founded by foreign entities that came here to the land to build their dreams, their empires, their treasures, their collective thoughts and religious freedom here on this land in the United States, America, North America. However, what they came here on is something that I'd like to explore, and I've been exploring in my writings, my musings, my blogs, and I'm very excited to have Max here tonight to talk about this subject, because as we watched last night, the American horror story of Congress trying to figure out which end is up and how to power play each other into corners and belittle and berate and threaten each other with their power, their thoughts, their actions, etc. We really have to understand why our country is so dysfunctional before we go out and try to conquer the planet and tell other countries what they should do with their governments, their ideologies, and their cultures, and their women to a certain extent. So here we are in 2013, the ever so evolutionary thread of consciousness we all claim to have, yet very rarely when this topic comes up can we navigate through it intelligently, well grounded and balanced in our emotional energies. Oftentimes the angry woman is perceived whenever we come out with these topics, and well, for rightful reason, because there is a lot of anger inside of the American feminine consciousness, and a lot of it is suppressed. Max Dashu founded the Suppressed Histories Archives in 1970 to research and document women's history from an international perspective. She has photographed some 15,000 plus slides and created 100 plus slideshows on female power and heritage trans historically. So for nearly the 40 years, she has presented hundreds of slide talks at universities, community centers, bookstores, schools, libraries, prisons, galleries, festivals, and conferences around North America. Her work bridges the gap between academia and grassroots education. It foregrounds indigenous women who are usually passed over by standard histories, and it highlights female spheres of power retained even in patriarchal societies. One of the big topics on people's minds today is the divine feminine consciousness. Well, that's great, but what does it mean? How do we work with it? And most importantly, how do we heal the shadow side of it, which has been so wrongfully ruined and in some ways, wounded, not ruined, wounded. And we have to really kind of go into that and take a look at it, guys, because if we don't, then what ends up happening is we put women into places of power that are dysfunctional and more or less have forgotten their roots as women, and the goddess archetype that they carry is often dysfunctional in itself. So we're going to talk about the light and dark side of the goddess, the shadow here. What does it mean to have an American goddess? It's not just based on what the forefathers brought with them from other continents. Who are the indigenous? What does it matter, and why do we have to honor them in order to understand who we are? Welcome, Max. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Hillary. Good to be with you.
So how are we going to awaken this inside of people, Max? Where do we start?
Well, there's so many different angles to it because, as you were saying, there is the indigenous heritage that's here, that's present on the land, the ancestors of this place that we live in. Wherever we come from, we're here now. And so that's one thing, and how they define their reality is something we have to look at because they may not use the word goddess. So, we have to be respectful of, cultural differences in the way that we're addressing our description of spiritual reality, right? And so that's part of it. Another part of it is that everyone who came here from somewhere else, whether they were dragged over in a slave ship or came, as an indentured servant or a settler from Europe, or were, Asians, there's all these different nationalities here. Everyone has their own authentic cultural heritages. And so that's part of the picture also, is because we're carrying that with us. And I think that all of us need an authentic place to stand in our own lineage, in our own cultural heritage. And then we can be able to stand side by side once we have to kind of clear the air because we are living in a colonial reality. And so it's a patriarchy, it's a racialized patriarchy. Just as, the racism is also gendered in this society. So we're dealing with a lot of really tough stuff that, there's been a lot of conversations about this, and this is continuing, since the 60s, really. I mean, maybe before as well. But so we need to be able to learn and listen from the indigenous peoples about their perception of Earth and reality, the cosmologies that they understand. And, I've spent a lot of time studying those and looking at that because there are models there for us to gain understanding. And I also feel like it's important to do a process of recovery because some of the things that you said, and you covered a mouthful in that introduction, is that we have all these toxic things going on, terrible crimes against women that are ongoing. And I see those as, it is, of course, the wounding of the divine female, but it's also, it's almost like you could look at culture as a set of programs that induce values and behavior, archetypes. There's all these force fields we're all moving in that, as babies, we suck in with our breath, and all of this is encoded into us. And so to decolonize ourselves, we have to grow an awareness about what those are, what are the force fields we move in, and what a deeper reality is. We have to be able to recognize that deeper reality, and that includes history. It includes knowledge of spiritual traditions from many parts of the world, but also the toxic scripts that are encoded in culture, which has so much to do with how the female is wounded and distorted and really poisoned through culture, through media, through marketplace lowest common denominator. I don't know if I'm sure you've probably done web searches for goddesses, just looking things up. I've done a lot of it, and since I've been using Google now, 10 years or whatever, it is really astonishing how there's been this proliferation of pornified images of goddess, of priestess. You do a search for medicine woman or female shaman, and you will get all of these really distorted images of the female that have their breasts stuck out way in front of them. Their bodies are in unnatural poses, really wasp-thin waists, really just so much. There's this unconscious absorption of cultural biases that are very constrictive to women. And so even sometimes, as you were saying, the attempts that we make to recover this, that the divine itself can be perceived through like through a looking glass, through a distorted funhouse mirror, where we think we're reaching back to that, and then we're getting something that's filtered through cultural prejudices and biases, if that makes sense to you.
Well, it certainly makes sense, and it's something that I'm glad that you have so well articulated for everybody, because it's such an emotional issue, don't you agree? When you get a bunch of people together to talk about this, it can get very emotional, and people don't often know how to navigate through those emotions when they talk about this. So when we look at the history of America, when we look at the roots that go into the land itself, what are we dealing with as far as the feminine energy goes? What would you consider to be the foundational feminine energy of the land the United States is built on?
Well, the United States is an empire, and so there are many countries that existed before the European invasions. So there's not just one archetype, but there are all kinds of ethnic traditions. There are many. And there's some common ground that those have, because you will see Earth Mother over and over, Old Woman. You'll see, all kinds of beings that are known all over the world, spider and serpent and things like that. Spider grandmother is very important in a great many cultures. Grandmother Moon is heard from a lot. And so there is a lot of common ground, but there are differences, too, amongst these cultures. And so that's where, just as if you were to go to Asia or Europe, you would see, well, you don't mix up India with China or France with Russia. And so similarly in North America as well, we have a whole process of getting, it's like falling in love. It's getting to know something that was really withheld, because the way that we were, just about everyone was educated, was to have these stereotypes, really, of the Indians, and so that was really sort of machining down all the differences. And Lakota is very different from Pueblo, which is very different from some of the eastern peoples, the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois, or, the Lenape, the Delawares. There's all these different flavors, there's all these different language traditions, but there are a lot of common themes. And so the old woman weaving the headband of the moon, or the frog in the moon, there are themes that recur. And some of these themes have resonances in other parts of the world. Because when you're looking at cosmovision, or the cultural dreamings of all these different societies, they're perceiving reality. These are their descriptions and their ways of accounting for reality and telling wisdom about the nature of reality. And so there are common themes that come up, not just in North America, but globally. The serpents connected with the waters, or, any kind of reptiles or amphibians with the waters. And then you have the felines being connected with fire and with the sun. And that's something that goes beyond, continents even. And so there are a lot of stories that around those things that come up that are similar, and certainly a lot of images around goddess, where you have the figurines that are on just about every continent, where you've got the woman cupping her breasts in her hands, as if to say, I am the nurturer, I am the life giver, I'm the ancestor, I'm the source. And so you have that. There are things we have in common, and especially when we're in a colonial situation, which those of us of the settler descent have in North America, it is not really for us to define what those traditions are. We can learn about them, and we can approximate what the actual knowledge carriers are saying, and so that's kind of the position that we find ourselves in. And, hopefully we will be able to join hands by being in solidarity with the indigenous people, because it isn't just patriarchy. I mean, this is an aspect of patriarchy, as I see it. Empire is not possible without patriarchy, without male domination, without violence, without systematized, standing armies and all the rest of that. But, we have also this colonial legacy that we're living with, this capitalism, all those things that are really based on hierarchy. And that's one of the primary substances of domination, is that there's the violence aspect, but there's also this idea of some automatically have more rights than others. And you see that in patriarchy, and you see that in empire, you see that in slavery, class systems. There's all kinds of ways that plays itself out.
Do you suppose that we need to change that to move forward, or do we need to get back? Yeah.
I don't see any other way, because even, I even believe that Goddess, or by whatever name you call the divine source, desires that of us. If we don't, then, how can we lay claim to any kind of spiritual attunement, to be allowing the devastation of the earth and all of the crimes that are, at this point, epidemic in the society? So that, I see spiritual attunement as like a basic requirement of life, of a conscious life. And if you have that spiritual attunement, then you can't shut yourself off from the pain of others. We have to move in some way, and no one can tell anyone else what that must be for their life. But we have to find a way to try and change this. It's like Martin Luther King talked about the long arc of the universe turning toward justice. Sometimes it seems to us like it's so unbearably slow. But from a standpoint of, say, European Americans, we've done a lot to change the standing of women in the last 150 years. It hasn't even been that long, since we had the conscious organized women's movement in the United States. And that is something that was really became more and more fixated on the vote. But initially, it was a little more broad-based because those activists came out of the anti-slavery movement. And so I think it's really important to have an integrated view of oppression, because it's not just patriarchy, it's not just racism or whatever things you care to name. There's a way in which all these are allied with each other, and we have to go to the root, which is really the meaning of the name radical, going to the root. Now, if we really go to the root of all being, that takes us into something that is beyond all these manifestations, and that can be the source out of which we draw strength for our action in attempting to restore justice. Because without the restoration of justice, the earth will be destroyed. They are destroying now.
Do you suppose that is where a lot of the anger comes from, is that we need to do just that?
The anger? What do you mean?
Going to the root. I mean, when people go to the root of anything, whatever kind of issue it is that they have some kind of problem with, or, even if it's an unconscious issue or struggles in life or challenges or whatever, unless you really go to the root of where that comes from, you really just live it over and over and over again in different ways until you deal with it, right? So, if we're trying...
you become stuck.
You become stuck. It becomes a cog in the wheel. So if you don't go back and figure yourself out and self-reflect and think about why you're manifesting this same situation over again, perhaps with somebody else, why is it that, you're doing this and it just keeps coming and you keep attracting? I mean, how many people say, why does this keep happening to me? Well, unless you sit down and take a look at it and go to the root of where this comes from within you, you will keep experiencing it. And on the macrocosm of that, we're looking at it in the same sense of our country. Unless we deal with what is at the root of the dysfunction and why we cannot become a co-creative, sustainable culture here, which we have the potential to do. I really believe that. Yeah. I believe that we have the potential. We have that kind of ability to be able to do that, but it's going to take an honest and accountable look at who we are on the personal, practical level, and also the collective macrocosm level as well. So going to the root. And so when people do that, well, they get angry. Usually, or sad.
I think that the pain is what creates the anger. You have pain when there's oppressive things going on, and terrible things happen. You lose a relative because, they die in prison or whatever, just all kinds of things happen. And those are the things that call our attention initially to the fact that things are structured in an oppressive way. That, in fact, this world is not being run by justice. It's being run by profit and by the powerful, But what you said about being able to manifest from within ourselves, that's like another aspect of going to the root. I mean, there's two things we're talking about here. One is going to the root of the problem in order to understand how it came about and therefore how to change it. And the other is going to the root of our being in order to draw strength from the source of the cosmos, that we all have within us, that we all can be both washed of our pain, transformed, but also that's going to the root, in that sense, means gaining wisdom, gaining solutions, even pathways and ideas and even feelings, intuitions that can lead us to where we need to go. Because, you find yourself stymied at a dead end, and that's like, now what do I do? And so those are moments to go to the root and just to try and really grok what next? What should be done? How can I transform this seemingly impossible situation? And I think a lot of our difficulty is that collective heritage that you were referring to, where it's not just the individual, but we find ourselves at we're at the end product of historical developments that are based on oppression, and so it becomes very, very tangled. And that leads to a lot of conflict. It leads to a lot of anger. And some of the anger, a lot of the anger is justified. But the problem is, how do we keep the anger from preventing us from being effective and from, it's just like, blowing off at one person isn't really going to change the overall structure. There's this ways, and I think that one of the biggest challenges before us is to learn to work in coalition. And we're not going to agree about everything.
We're not going to agree about everything.
What we agree about that we can work on together.
Exactly. We are not going to agree on everything. It's not a mental, rational process. So when people attack or kind of try to discuss or debate this issue, it cannot be done based solely on an intellectual, mental level, because basically we're not just mental, intellectual people. We have emotions, we have spirit, we have, biological. We're just so multidimensional, it just can't be. One of the things that you said that caught my attention was that you cannot shut yourself off from others' pain. One of the things that when I talk about or think about or contemplate the goddess energy, it is a nurturing energy, it is an accepting energy, it is a forgiving energy, it is a kind of void that allows you to go into the dark and sit there and think and dream and pray, and you do find your own pain, you do find it, but when you take that out into the world and you deal with other people, oftentimes what happens, especially in the New Age movement, is people don't like someone's energy, or they look at someone and they judge it as negative or this or that, and they just have no concept of how to be, which is a feminine trait, with another person's pain. So how do we do that?
How do we handle each other's pain?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's in our own. I mean, there is something to be said for being able to hear somebody into speech and allow them expression. And it is possible to get stuck. Some people will get stuck in speaking their pain over and over and over and not being able to get out of it. But I do believe there's a different, more shamanistic level to being able to release the pain. There's an energetic practice of releasing pain. And I think sometimes, like you say, it's not just intellectual. We have multiple dimensions to our being. And most of the time we're operating on, some kind of beta brainwave level, or, left brain, or whatever you want to call it, where it's just really superficial to the depths. And it's the depths from which we need to be transformed. That's like back to what we were saying about going to the root. So I think that we are going to have more transformative ceremony around this kind of thing, where people can go into and resolve those things in themselves and with each other. And I do think that there is value in practices of detachment. Not that somebody should not be aware of their pain or the source of the pain, or, the issues between you and other people, but that just screaming it out doesn't really get us anywhere. We need to be able to have, to hear each other And sometimes wrongs are being committed, so, we have to find ways of dealing with those. That to some degree, the pain is not going to go away until the wound is salved. And to salve the wound, what I mean by that is that wrongs must be made right. So the communities where fracking is going on, they need our help and their support. The people like the Winnemem-Winto up in Northern California, they had a bunch of their land taken away when the Shasta Dam was built, and now the government is talking about raising the dam, which would flood even more of their lands. And so it's incumbent on us to be aware of what's going on and to find ways to support those people, just as we, of course, need also to give support to the woman in Marysville, Missouri, who was, this whole family was attacked because of a rape of the daughter of the family by some, elite athletes in the town, and their families had pull and got the charges dropped, and so and the whole town turned on the rape victim and her family, and eventually burned down their house. It was a really horrible case. So those kinds of things, or the Marisa Alexander case in Florida, we really, in order to transform the pain of patriarchy, part of that process is changing those things and bringing our energy to bear on that, and making sure that that justice is done. And in fact, that case, the lieutenant governor just called for a grand jury to be convened because that was never done, and so that there will actually be a trial in that case. And Marisa Alexander had the conviction was overturned because she didn't get a fair trial, and that both of those cases happened because there was an internet outcry. And so, there's this new cyber reality where we're able to actually, first know about, and second, get mass action on injustices of that kind and actually bring about healing and right the wrongs. So those are all things that we can do about the pain, not just to make the pain pass, but also to really act in the world,
Well, I love how you're bringing it to real time by, looking at headlines, following cases that are affecting us now, and I do the same. And I really find a kind of balance there that is personally needed for me. It needs to be brought into the real time, needs to be brought into the now, things that have happened in the past, things that are ongoing. And we need to, and by what I see, when I say that, what I see is basically a bridging between understanding the goddess energies, which oftentimes we relate to long, long ago, deep, deep in our past, in the Greek myths and all these wonderful classical temples all over the world. But we have that same kind of energy today in the modern world when we're talking about things like this. And one of the cases that I've been following pretty closely is the 12-year-old that committed suicide, Rebecca Ann Sedgwick, and she was being bullied by another 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, all girls. Mm-hmm. And what really struck me in this story was that this happened, it became a national tragedy. The arrest of two classmates, both 12 and 14, for felony aggravated stalking in the bullying case, and only one of them said or felt any kind of remorse or sorry.
Yeah.
The other one did not, still hasn't. And that broke my heart. And it broke not in a bad way. When we look at these kind of things, guys, it's not about becoming attached to the pain. Just like Max said, one of the things that you have to do is you can't shut yourself off from others' pain, but you have to be kind of detached with compassion and providing supportive energies, which is what the goddess does. She embraces all situations. Anybody who's ever raised kids knows that conditional unconditional love does not work in parenting. You cannot only love your kids if they are a certain way. You have to learn how to unconditionally love your children. And when I think of creator, goddess creation, I think of her loving everything she's created, whether it hates her back or it gets mad at her or, et cetera, all this stuff. So when we look at these modern day myths that are forming, and they really are stories that are forming, just like any myth you'll read in any kind of book. We have a 12-year-old feminine goddess who decided to take her own life because she couldn't handle the pain. The pain was so overwhelming. And then she
had no support.
No support, and neither did her family.
She had no community around her saying, what is happening to you is terrible. She didn't feel like she had any place to turn.
And that's that. I find that in America. One of the things I've been doing, and I don't know if you out there listening are aware of this, is I have created a new blog called Mega Ritual 1122, and I am following the mainstream TV show American Horror Story now in its third season. This is the first time I've done it. I've been a fan of the show for a long time, since it started, and I decided to pick up this because I have been, I love first of all, I love the writers on the show. The writers on the show are brilliant. They're fantastic. They take a subject and they turn it into this multidimensional plethora of symbolic bliss that you can just go through and find. But this season, they're talking about the woman. They're talking about the American Horror Story of the woman, the female archetypes, the stereotypes, they're diving into a woman's power, her fear of it, her misuse of it, her joy within it, her sexual power, all of these really important things that we need to look at. So what I've done is I've created this blog to follow along each week to dissect it, not only lift the higher message of it, but also really go into it so that we can understand just what the characters symbolize, not just within the show or within ourselves, but collectively as an American citizen, and how we can figure this out. So when I say it's an American Horror Story, I mean it. And I'm writing about it, and you're welcome to follow along and get on there and post and do your own research with me and add to it, because it's only going to happen for the season, and then I'm done, and I'm going to, I'm still on the yin factor, but I'm going to go back to just the yin factor. This is just a moment in time for me to add my energy to healing the goddess feminine energy on a large collective mainstream vein scale, because that's what I see it as. We have children sitting at home watching these shows with absolutely no context of what the symbolism could possibly mean on a higher message. They watch it, they see the bitches and the witches and all of these things. Oh yeah, I can relate to that. Oh yeah, she's awesome. I hate this one. I hate that one. Yeah. But have they been taught how to create sisterhood? And obviously, the Rebecca Ann Sedgwick case in Florida shows very clearly that we have a big problem. We have young boys going into school, shooting, killing other people. You don't see any young girls walking into school. Why? Why are they taking up this bullying, this bullying kind of death mother, crazy woman kind of energy and running with it? Because they're being taught. And the goddess is the keeper of the child. And so we're dealing with healing the inner child, the inner feminine energy within men. I mean, how many men can come out as a psychic publicly and not go through hell doing it? So I
see that the media has a lot to do with how that's created also, because a lot of the people, some of these kids don't have good parenting, but, in some cases it's just like it's a total shock to the parents what came out, because the kids are consuming all this violent, whether it's movies, video games, or whatever. There's this drooling over violence and this attraction to violence for the thrills, like the adrenaline rush or whatever it is that's in the media, so that, scenes of a man with guns blowing people away, they've viewed that hundreds, maybe thousands of times in their young life. So that's like a model for them. It's like a meme that's out there that they just pick up on this meme, and it's like, yeah, this is what life is. This is what reality is. That's how toxic it is. The cultural conditioning is tremendous, so that even, I know people who have raised children who have been going out of their way to try and inculcate different values, but then that child goes to school and they're around other kids who are, it's everything from the football to the whatever, you just name it, all of the suspense movies and the blowing up scenes and all of that, and violence just pervades American culture. in that way. I mean, it pervades it in other ways, too, like guns. But, that's something that we have such a task ahead of us, because those types of archetypes are magnified a millionfold by the fact that the controlling forces of the media, and backed up by advertising. It's all a market-run system. Lowest common denominator. That is what is socializing our youth. And internet porn as well, gonzo porn.
Well, that's true. I mean, they're learning. Boys are learning how to respect women through that filter.
Or not.
And school, pornography, school. Your parents can do the best job they can, but you don't have your kids for the majority of the day. Your kids are being taught how to live in school programs where they are out of the house from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and more so if they do after-school activities. So you're talking about the majority of the day, your kids are being taught by other people, other interactions, taught by example by other people and other interactions. So they can come home and you can have the greatest intentions and the most beautiful visions for your families, but you don't have your kids.
Well,
for the majority of their childhood.
There have been scholars that studied that and said that, in fact, the peers have more influence on kids than their parents at this stage. But that's what's happening. So, on the positive side, there is an attraction. I mean, there is some skewed stuff happening there, but a lot of kids are attracted. It's like there's all the sword and sorcery genre. They are attracted. There's something indigenous in the Lord of the Rings, or there's some aspects to the Harry Potter and some of those things that they are getting to shamanistic directions. It's off in most cases, in my opinion, but I think that there's a way in which the kids are really attracted to all of these elf archetypes and things that really reference shamanic realities. It's just that the primary purveyors of those themes, once again, it goes through the top of the economic structure, and so you don't have people directing those movies who really know about those things. You see, so that it doesn't come out in a real way. And this is like a whole issue of the false representation that kind of permeates the culture and the mass media, is because that is a very far reach from the old woman in a village somewhere who knows to go out and gather herbs and perform certain kinds of chants, and how to carry out healings and how to resolve trauma for somebody that she's treating. There's it's all been mystified and mediatized to a degree that it's very hard for most people to glimpse. But I really believe that, going back to this idea of going to the root, that is what has to happen. And that's the reason that I spent the last 3 years working on a DVD that I just put out this year called Woman Shaman, the Ancients, was to gather as much of the archaeological evidence as I could for us to be able to see all of this, not just a little bit here once in a while and over there, but to bring it all together and say, look, women are not just followers of men. There are entire cultural traditions where women were leading medicine people, were, the healers, the shamans. And I'm not saying men never do those things or don't have those aspects to them, but there's been this cultural eradication of memory of those realities, of the things that women can do and have done, and entire ethnic traditions where there was this very strong recognition of those powers of dreaming and the oracles, all these different aspects of transformation and access, how to access source, that were going on, so that we can see it in Chinese bronzes where you have women shamans that they called Wu, doing ecstatic dances and pouring out libations and playing on gongs and drums and dancing with birds, dancing with cranes. This is like not what you usually are taught about China, where women are supposed to always be oppressed and obedient. They are leading ceremony. And the same thing with the rock art. in the ancient Sahara or South Africa or Baja California, or just it could go on, Australia. There are really, really ancient murals, not just in the European caves, but in all these other places, showing medicine women and ceremony, and sometimes female shapeshifters who are part animal and part human. So they are in non-ordinary reality, or maybe we could say they are in dreaming reality. And so why haven't we been shown these things, and how much we really need to see them? Because we have to heal the wound in our own psyches that was dealt by toxic culture that deprived us of any consciousness that these realities exist or that women could be powerful in them. So I've gathered all this together, and there's on my website you can see a link there on suppressedhistories.net to the page where the DVD can be ordered, but also a description of it, all of the different chapters that, like what I found is there were patterns. The whole chapter on sacred fans and herbal bundles, another one on ritual stabs, and this is how we begin to approach, again, knowledge just by seeing what patterns exist there and what the ancients left behind for us to see. And so, the masks of ancient medicine women from Siberia, and drumming and rattling, and just all these different angles on the way ceremony was done by the ancients, and the commonalities, the common patterns that exist in the way that healers were treating people, and the way that the oracles and the prophets were finding wisdom about whether it's understanding the roots of a situation, like we were saying, going back to the source and saying, why is this person afflicted? What's going on with them? And so you have a divination, and the healer does a divination in order to understand that, and then undertakes the healing. There's just so many different aspects to this that we're just beginning, in this movement that really began over 40 years ago, to attempt to say, wait a minute, what they showed us was real is not all of reality, because there was this very scientific and mechanistic idea of how the universe works, like a machine, right? But it's not a machine. It's alive, and it's conscious, and it's resonant, and we can put ourselves in attunement with that. We can cause resonance ourselves so that we can transform the material, and this is something even physics has come to. Materialism kind of fell apart in the last 50 or 60 years in the world, the very materialistic world of physics. They began to discover that, in fact, you cannot predict mechanistic outcomes because the nature of light is a little bit like a wave and a little bit like a particle. And once you get down into those very deep layers of matter, you cannot predict where that one electron or atom is going to be. You can only have a probability curve about where it'll end up next. So everything almost dovetailed back together. It was like the serpent eating its tail, because even the most extreme rationalistic realms of science in the, quote, West came around to the tail again, where they found that their definition of reality was coming back again and approaching that the ancient wise ones were describing, whether it was in China or India or ancient native North America, that there are things that cannot be described in a linear manner or even understood by the linear mind. So that's the shamanic reality. And so,
I just love listening to you talk. I just have to tell you, I have been I have fallen in love with your work, Max, as I was preparing for the show. And I have always, ever since I met you through Maria Yates, where we were at the Grandmother Summit, where we were both presenters, it was such a fascinating subject. And I've always known about your website, and I go there often. But I just want other people to know how wonderful it is. Suppressedhistories.net. She offers online courses, webcasts, There's a tremendous amount of information on here. If you are an author or a researcher or an armchair philosopher or researcher, I don't care what level you do it at, this is a phenomenal collection of accurate history, and she works very hard at restoring women to cultural memory. And it also helps men restore women to cultural memory through themselves and through the women in their life. I have it on my to-do list, Max, to buy all of your posters, to frame them beautifully and hang them someplace in my home, because it's surreal. It's almost like looking at symbols and having the symbols awaken a level of consciousness inside of you. When you look at these statues, these masks, these icons, it is amazing the movement that happens inside of a person's body, mind, and soul. And so when you have this fabulous, I'm looking at it right now, wonderful YouTube video on here on the homepage, you call it Restoring Women to Cultural Memory. And as you watch it, as you listen to it, as you allow yourself to receive the information, you do at some multidimensional level begin to untangle this crazy, insane, lost web that's inside of all American women and a lot of women around the world. I mean, I have listeners from all over the place. If you're not from America, that's okay. But the American culture, as it spreads its hands and arms out into other places on the world, trying to become the United States of the world, we have to, if we're going to become a global society, or if we're going to become a healed, whole, planetary society, we need to make sure that we are on a very balanced structure. We cannot do that without realigning with whole source. And it's not just a man or woman thing, or a patriarch or matriarch thing, or a divine feminine, divine male thing. It's about coming together to create the cosmic child, which is in fact neither, and can equally go out into the world and create from that stance. So
wholeness, yeah, definitely. And that video, by the way, that you mentioned is from my first DVD, which is called Women's Power and Global Perspective. And one thing that I address in there is that in the mother right cultures, there is good information for men there too, because it's not only the feminine within them, but it's that the idea that males are doomed to be bullies. There are other heritages out there. There's other history out there in societies where males were not dominators. And I think that's really important for men to know. There's other ways of doing it. That there's not just a history of only male dominance. And, there are, so a lot of the native writers are beginning to write about matriarchy now and claiming that as their term for the societies that existed pre-conquest from the Iroquois and other traditions. And one of the Iroquois writers, Barbara Alice Mann, talks about chiefs of the Iroquois who used the symbolism of having big breasts which give good milk as, in other words, the men were not ashamed to use female symbolism. And in patriarchal societies, men are running as far as they can from being called to be like women. And here, it's something very different because it's much more of a complementary cultural system. So that's good to keep in mind.
We need to know how to do it. We need to know, we need to have the correct tools. And by correct, I don't mean my way or your way or somebody else's way. I just mean balanced. I mean, just being able to and to be open-minded about it, and not to have an ideology so fixated in your mind and your heart that that's all you can see. It's all you can see. I always kind of reference that to, the kid who could never really play baseball. Perhaps in growing up and just was always forced to play baseball by their parents and just made to be a baseball player, and inside always wanted to do art, but was never given that proper space to be able to even consider that. So, you go and you go and you go and you're trying to achieve a dream everybody else tells you to do. It's like an impersonation. It's a fraud of self. You're not being true to who you are. So therefore, you create a goddess of fraud and you honor her and you say, okay, great. I see it. I'm a fraud. I'm living someone else's idea of what I should be. Now it's time to make peace with that, and you do whatever you need to do, whether it's a ceremony or a prayer or you go ride your bike for 10 miles. I don't know. And I don't care, quite frankly, as long as you do something to honor that, and you transform it, and you reclaim, you restore your self. And then you go from there.
It's really about your own real nature. And I don't care if it's Buddhism or whatever it is, the real path is getting back to being able to know, to really wake up to your own real nature. And, to nature itself, to what the reality of nature is, which is why I'm such a big lover of walking in nature, because, that's the best source of accessing wisdom I know of.
Well, I just want to, also discuss quickly too, because when you take on doing this kind of stuff, it's funny how people react to it, meaning that, oh, you're a feminist. Oh, you're a man-hater. Oh, you're this. There's so many cultural labels that we have that have been given to us that don't belong to us. There are more impersonations. They're more fraudulent. Mm-hmm. And, I just want to tell everybody listening that, you know what? You come up against it, it's okay. I always say, if you're backed into a corner, move the walls. You just have
don't be afraid of being labeled, because, that's a lot of times those people throwing those labels are attempting to intimidate. Oh, no, I'm not that. And the person retreats. And so you can't be intimidated by that.
Yeah, and we have to learn to stop doing that to other people. If somebody walks up to you and says, well, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I feel really passionate about right now, and I'm taking on the goddess, and I'm sharing all of this fabulous things on Max's website and everybody else, and I'm plastering it all over, it's not about your agenda. It's just about supporting, honoring a person's right to expression, not about going and fixing them or correcting them or making a point. It's about circling a topic, being supportive, being community, being in a stance of love. A lot of people don't know what that means, to be in a stance of love. Love has become such a worn out word in so many ways, because, the New Age movement talks about, oh, let's just all be love. We're all one love. Well, guess what? A lot of people have no freaking idea what you mean by that, because they have no concept of even what love is, self-love or other, which really is all the same thing. So if we don't have a healed, whole relationship with our emotional self, our mental, our intellect, our body, our mind, spirit, soul, if we're not at peace with that, and if we can't go out there and express that freely without any kind of restriction, then we got some work to do, and it's okay. It's okay if we're not that. And I think there's a lot of guilt, shame, and other stuff that kind of festers under the surface for people with that, because they feel like they know what they need to do, but they don't do it, so they don't want to tell everybody because they don't want people to judge them, and as soon as something slips out, you have that instant reaction from somebody, and you go right back in underneath your shell, and you keep yourself hidden there because you already saw what it's like to stick your head out. You got attacked.
Yeah, and that's why ultimately fear is really a big problem. The shame and everything, but under that is fear that it will happen to you again, And so people get easily, they're in flight a lot of the time, I think, just because they don't know what to do, and things are very complex, and they don't want to be called on things, or they don't want somebody to rain on them about something, and so they're always just like, it's really weird how, this society, it's just like fear, when it's permanent, is anxiety. It's just like this constant state of dread. And I think a lot of people walk around with that without even recognizing it, And
we're afraid of our ugly.
Mm-hmm.
We're afraid of our ugly. Culturally, Americans are afraid of their ugly on a lot of levels. So are a lot of people, human beings. But you know what? I have found that ugly is beautiful. And, my wish for people is to go into this kind of work, this topic, this subject, find your website, explore it, listen to your videos, buy your posters, read books by whoever you want to read books by, or whatever, however you find it. It doesn't matter, as long as you find it and you just integrate whatever whatever calls to you in a way of beauty, and you move it out. And beauty does not just is not just about being, daisies and unicorns and parading around and preaching, happy, happy. It's about getting into the mud, rolling around, and letting that mud dry in the sun and pull the toxins out of your skin.
Mm-hmm. And the lotus grows out of the mud.
Oh, that's right. We're out of time. Max, do you have anything you would like to share with listeners?
I wanted to mention that I also have Suppressed Histories Archives on Facebook, and that is just started to balloon like crazy. I'm posting there pretty much every day. There's a whole archive of images and essays in there also that people can explore.
Excellent. You can find her on Facebook, which I have, and I enjoy going to her page every day, and I enjoy sharing the information. It makes people think. It makes people change. It makes people love. It heals community. It restores something that is very vital in our culture, in our relationships, in ourselves. And I'm so very honored to have had you on here so people can listen to you. And hopefully our show has aided in that somehow, some way, maybe an aha moment here or there, or a smile or a tear, has moved something for all of you, because I, of course, love all of you. And this is the point of the show here. Max, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Hillary.
Good night, everyone. Till next time, namaste.